Hello, and thank you for joining Canadian Authors BC chapter for the opening of our 2024 program. 2023 was a great year for CAA BC. We had 8 featured presenters, in-person summer and winter socials, credible presence at Word Vancouver, and at 5 literary festivals on the mainland and on the islands. We sponsored a scholarship at UBC and responded to a number of requests for advice on writing and building a writing career. In 2024, our focus is going to be on giving our members a chance to read their work to the wider community. And Elizabeth McLean opens the year with this fabulous Autobiographies and open mic night. So grab a cup of your favorite drink and listen in to Jeff Inverarity, Jean Manning, Margaret Hume, Patrick McLaren, Heather Kahn, and Jarina Tobiasen read from their personal stories.
Okay, Jeff is first. Jeff, are you there?
I am here.
All right. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Everybody
Yes.
hear me okay? Okay, great. My name's Jeff Inverarity. I'm currently on Galliano Island, which is the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people. Here amongst other things, I run the Galliano Island Literary Festival. I'm going to read a piece about my mother today, and from my book. You can see it, maybe. Oh, there we go. All the Broken Things. There's a companion piece now available about my father, and you'll see why that would be necessary in the latest issue of Subterrane magazine. My mother kept a clean house even after she died suddenly from a massive stroke. Luckily for my father, left alone in the house to take care of himself, spare bedding was neatly folded, ironed, and stacked in the linen cupboard beside the water heater, each sheet, pillowcase, or blanket individually wrapped in a heavy plastic bag, sealed with sticky tape, and bearing, my mother's haunting touch of genius, a self-adhesive label pointing out the date each thing had last been washed. So when I arrived, bewildered, jet-lagged, and grief-struck, I was able to find exactly the right combination of thoughtfully itemized bedding, while my father could sit red-eyed and weepy beside her empty chair in the living room. I took the dust sheets off the furniture in the bedroom I had used far less often than she would have liked, and made up my bed with a matched set of fresh sheets, crisp pillowcases, and clean blankets. She was still there then, only a few days dead, hovering in the convergence of plastic, sticky tape, and labels, directing the show, organizing us. During her life, the habits became something of a compulsion. She threw away nothing that could ever be used again for anything, no matter how inconvenient, ugly, or unsuitable. Empty margarine tubs would reappear under plant pots to catch the water. The lids of yogurt containers or coffee tins would make triumphant comebacks, gaily transformed into handy drink coasters by the simple application of tartan Mac tack. Any wool left over from the sweaters and scarves under perpetual construction was immediately knitted into small squares, the squares sewn into blankets, and the blankets wrapped in plastic bags, dated, labeled, and sent to the children in Africa. And she was still there 7 years later when I took another of those dreadful transatlantic flights. This time my father was in intensive care, sporting a colostomy bag, heavily sedated, half-gutted, and greatly reduced in himself. I found myself alone, I thought, in my father's empty house, except my mother was there again, a phantom in the linen cupboard, asserted by her neat and rounded girls' boarding school script. She was still the ghost in the machine of household tasks, those small renewals and reorderings that sustain us, leave us free for the vast and dirty business of living. The bedding was ready, last washed well over 7 years before, but still fresh and well wrapped. As each seal was broken, my mother disintegrated a little further. My niece, who had picked me up at the airport, remarked on each label in baffled awe at so dedicated an engagement with entropy. All those hours spent on keeping a clean house, all those thousands of hours spent folding and ironing, as if the forces of disorder were ever massed outdoors, pacing and snarling in the raspberry canes, waiting for an unfinished task for the defenses to come down. She kept those specters of anarchy away as best she could, their reality scarred into her being by the stalking horror of having lived in the midst of global warfare. When your experience of life includes such terrors, then you'd better know where your life jacket is. You'd better be prepared. You'd better have the blankets ready. Be on guard for the cataclysm, the earthquake, the explosion, the flood or famine, the sound of the air raid sirens, the thunder of invisible bombers, cancer, a stroke, or perhaps even the discovery that there is another woman in your husband's life. She was real, that other woman, and I have learned that she was there for over 20 years. Her solid shadow falling across the needlework, no matter how big a bulb my mother put in the standard lamp above my father's empty chair. Now I am drawn back in time to watch my mother alone in the house night after night, and I am forced to watch her turning up the radio to cover the sound of nails tapping at the window. I am beside her as she spends her days alone, wiping, dusting, scrubbing, and polishing. I see her as she finds a plastic bag, one of the ones she never threw away, and wraps up the coffee pot or glassware or the napkin ring, writes out the label, seals the bag, and packs it away. Then she can reline all the drawers and the cupboards, paper, thumbtacks, and a dated label. Take the leftover fabric from the curtains she just gathered and sew it into a matching bedspread. Make new lampshades out of pressed flowers and clear plastic. Even reupholster the dining room chairs until everything is marked, accounted for, and controlled. I hover invisible by her side because we have reached the point where all there is left to do is to find one bag big enough to cover the whole house and all the rest of us in it, and write out a label that says, like all the other labels, "This is my house, these are my children, and this is my husband. I will never leave." I am like her now, writing this, keeping disorder at bay in my own way, telling a story, putting a little more design into the chaos of my own experience. I am still breaking the seals today on a package of my schoolwork, on a christening present from a long dead godfather, a silver napkin ring engraved with my initials, cherished, wrapped in a small plastic bag, and lovingly labeled with the date of its last polish. Each seal broken is another breach with the past, but it is also another chance to remember her, touch what she touched, thank her for all her work. And as each seal is broken, I imagine another small release for her, because her work is almost finished. Soon, none of this will matter, and it's long past the time for her to rest.
Thank you very much, Jeff. What a vivid picture of your mother. Great detail. Very touching, very touching. Thank you very much for sharing. Did you say it's been published already?
Yes, it's in my book.
And can you show the book, please, to the screen?
Yeah.
And the
Try to
title
get it.
is?
And it's dear, I can't get it in focus. It's called All the Broken Things. It's published
Okay.
by Anvil Press.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, that's good.
Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And as I say, the companion piece about my father is in the new issue of Subterrane.
Aha. Oh. But it will become a book eventually?
No, I think just
No.
the two standalone pieces
Just
are as long as they need to be, I think.
I see. All right. Okay. Once again, thank you very much for sharing such a touching story. All right. The next reader is Jean Manning. Jean, you're on, please.
Okay, it's Jean Manning, and I live in Kelowna. I've written about a half dozen books, both single and both myself and co-authored, about an obscure topic. And so what I'm going to read is what I'm working on, a memoir, and what I'm going to read is the beginning of my Odyssey. It starts in 1983. As if I didn't have enough drama in my life that year, I had to go and meet the Magnet Man. His name first reached my ears in Sunseed Restaurant in the town of Vernon. Sunseed was a meeting place for a circle of friends I hung out with. A half dozen showed up that day. You could picture our circle as an assortment of dreamers. We read books like Ecotopia Emerging. We aimed for a way of life in tune with the natural world. Homemade music, health, and harmony were our lifestyle choices, even though elusive. We wanted a spiritopia. Some of us had skipped the flower child phase back in the 60s, even though whoops, I lost my way. If we'd been to San Francisco, it wasn't for drugs. As I looked at my friends and their health snacks and smoothies, I smiled. The previous night, my youngest son had described us humorously and more tactfully than most teenagers. The new age, Stan had said, is for people who missed Woodstock. My oldest son had a similar view, yet earlier. Jay had barely begun elementary school when his teacher asked students to describe their parents. My mom is a bit of a granola, Jay had reported. And my daughter, Teresa, as the oldest, had sensed that her father viewed my counterculture friends in the food co-op as questionable hippies. Now, in another town and 7 years later, I was a single parent about to meet a new challenge. It was as if I had subconsciously placed an ad out in the universe on some ethereal bulletin board. Have writing skills, will travel. Youngish mother, soon to be empty nester, seeks her next mission. Surprise me. At our restaurant table, the group was listening to Ronald. His graying beard was neatly trimmed as always, and he exuded culture and confidence. 2 years previously, I'd fallen in love with his mellifluous voice as he described ideals that resonated with mine. I hadn't seen the danger signs when he moved into my house in Kelowna all too soon after his marriage breakup. Instead, I pictured myself as the helpmate to a visionary working toward a better world. In discussions, he readily dropped phrases such as communities sharing, stewards of the land, building beauty, living in harmony. Sunseed's door swung open and another regular arrived. It was Roger. He and Ronald competed in racquetball, yet were close friends. Raj was a health educator by day and laid-back musician at night. This day, his smile conveyed excitement. He'd just returned from Penticton at the southern end of Okanagan Lake. While there, a fellow musician had introduced him to Magnet Man. We met Bill Muller. He's traveled the world working for Siemens Electric. They call him Magnet Man here in the valley, Roger began. He invented an electricity generator that doesn't need fuel. He spoke in a fervent tone I'd never heard from our mellow musician. The man sold everything he owns to work on his invention for the good of mankind. Bill has lung problems from being the electrician in uranium mines, but that doesn't stop him. I was curious. Ronald, however, leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms, a skeptical stance that surprised me. Roger may have noticed the body language. He urged us to visit Muller ourselves. You have to hear him tell what you can do with these new super powerful magnets. You can use the magnets for 50 years and they don't lose strength. Our eyes may have glazed over because his voice increased in volume. Bill found a way to spin magnets past wire coils on a wheel without electrical drag. Roger's voice trailed off, seeing blank faces across the table. We still didn't get it. Look, he said, Bill's breakthrough is a big deal. You talk about wanting to live out at Bear Valley, but those meadows are way beyond the power lines. I looked at the peaceful face of a woman across the table, Josephine. She lived in a big cabin with her husband and their teenagers at Bear Valley. My thoughts drifted to that remote valley, the pristine refuge of pine-scented air between forested mountainsides. Roger continued, how will you get electric power? Not from solar. Half the winter, sun doesn't shine much, and in Bear Valley, wind isn't reliable. You don't want a diesel generator. What if there's a device any mechanic could build and it makes enough electricity to run itself and appliances, even heaters for a greenhouse? Ronald smiled smugly. An impossible perpetual motion machine. No, Roger was as vehement as he gets. This guy knows. He says perpetual motion is impossible in a closed system, but he says his system is open to the cosmos. Unimpressed, Ronald stroked his beard. Go see for yourself, Roger challenged. His description of a saintly inventor was balanced by a young woman, Deb, who bounced into the conversation. Deb thought she had met the guy Bill Muller at someone's house. Middle-aged, grabs the spotlight, funny. Man, can he party. Josephine had seen another aspect. When she'd lived in Penticton, Bill once came to her meditation group. They happened to be talking about prana, a word from ancient India meaning an all-pervasive, subtle form of energy. When he heard about prana, Bill had wondered if it might solve a puzzle. As his magnets perform work, they push and pull and don't run out of strength. Could they tap into some source unknown to today's experts? What interested me about this motor generator thing went beyond our dreams of keeping Bear Valley clean and quiet. What if an invention could save our young people from going off to fight oil wars? Despite the disapproval in Ronald's eyes, I said, I want to meet these people. And the next time Josephine drove to Penticton, I was in her car along with her friend Jake.
Thank you, Jean.
Are you, excuse me, Jean, are you done? This is the end?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, I should have said that's as far as I'll get today.
Okay. At what stage is this work at? Are you just beginning or is it almost done?
I have bits and pieces, but it's definitely not almost done. I have lots to say, but haven't worked on it consistently.
Very good. All right, well, continue. It's a very good beginning. There is a real feel to it. All right, thank you very much. The next speaker is Patricia, and I don't see Patricia on the screen. Patricia Corbett? No, Patricia is not here. All right. So the next speaker is Margaret. Margaret, you are there, please.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
My name is Margaret Ann Hume, and I apologize for my camera. It's about to be replaced, and I couldn't improve on it. I'm going to be reading tonight from my father's autobiography, which I co-wrote with him. He wrote 80%, I wrote 20, but I also edited and subtracted and added from his part and got a real editor too. And this book was self-published in 2012. The other thing to tell you is that my father, part of this was to tell the family story, but also his war record. He was a bomber pilot, a Lancaster bomber in the Second World War. And so the part I'm going to read is just after the war in Europe ended and he was heading home. On June 9, 1945, I was posted to a Canadian RCAF base in Yorkshire for repatriation back home, and I was there waiting for 7 weeks. My crew continued on with another pilot until 1946. Since I was in Yorkshire, I took the opportunity to pay a special visit to say goodbye to Ron Norgrove's parents. Ron was the navigator. Ma and Pa Norgrove in Hyde. At the end of my visit, Ma walked me to the bus stop and, holding my hand, thanked me for bringing Ron back safely. She said she always knew he would come home safely. When I asked how she knew that, she said, "You told me. Stop worrying, Ma. Ron will come back home safely because I intend to survive and go back to Canada." I don't remember saying it, but she took it as gospel and got great comfort from my utterance. During this time, I met a guy from Campbellton. That was where my father was from, Campbellton, New Brunswick. Flight Lieutenant Boudreau. His mother ran a little store on Prince William Street across from the Barnes's house. The two of us walked and hitchhiked to the Lake District. I stayed at a good hotel, swam in one of the lakes, and relaxed. Finally, I received my orders to leave for home and went by train to Glasgow and the River Clyde, and then boarded the Ile-de-France. There were about 15,000 of us jammed in together. The sleeping quarters were poor compared to the stateroom for 4 we had had on the Queen Elizabeth on our way to England. However, the weather was fine and sunny on the crossing, which took 7 days. We arrived in Halifax at Pier 21 early Sunday morning. A PA announcement said that any Maritimers were to report to the purser's office. We were told there were not enough troop trains available, and if we could make our own way home on civilian trains, buses, and the like, we would be given our month's leave pass and free travel passes. What a break! In an hour, I was dressed in my blue officer's uniform, packed, and walked off the ship carrying 2 suitcases. I headed for the CNR station and got a ticket and a sleeping berth on the 7 p.m. train for that night. After checking my 2 bags, I walked to Kay Napier Covert's home. This was a friend, opposite the Lord Nelson Hotel. The family was in Chester, but their maid was there. She was from Campbellton and knew me. She let me use their telephone, and I made several long-distance calls home to Campbellton. She even made me lunch and was wonderfully hospitable. My arrival home on August 6, 1945, after almost 2 years away, was exceptionally happy. I was met by family at the CN rail station. Mary, his fiancée, my mother-to-be, was working at the Soldiers Memorial Hospital that day, so we met later that evening. We had not seen each other since September 1943, and it was a joyous reunion. By this time, we had been engaged for almost a year. We could not wait to get married and quickly got a marriage license, which required a minimum waiting period of 2 weeks before the wedding could take place. So we picked Wednesday, August 22nd as our wedding date. While we were waiting and arranging the details for the honeymoon train trip to Montreal in the Laurentians, my brother Bill arrived home from England, and we designated him to be best man. Mary picked her classmate and friend Myrtle McIntosh to be her maid of honor. The war in Japan ended while we were waiting. The town declared a civic holiday, and there was to be a parade down Water Street from the railway overpass to the park. I was selected to be the officer in charge of one of the army sections, and later the mayor asked me to be one of the speakers from the band platform in the park. By the time several politicians had spoken, and then about 3 ministers of various faiths, I was introduced to speak on behalf of the veterans. I said, "My father told me when speaking in public, stand up to be seen, speak up to be heard, and shut up to be remembered." And that was all I said. I got quite a cheer, and we all took off for the local Legion Hall behind the post office for some beer. What an incredible feeling it was to be safely home again with the war over. Of the 10 crews with which I started at Operational Training Unit, ours was the only one to survive the war. So we finished this book and launched it on my dad's 90th birthday. He was so happy to have it done, and he passed away 1 month later. So I certainly got it done just in time, but it's been a blessing to have it done. Thank you.
Margaret, thank you very much. That's very good, very interesting for me because I grew up in post-war Europe, of course, and I talked to and read about many people what happened when they finally came home after the war. Okay, so you definitely rendered it very well. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right. Margaret is next. Margaret. I'm sorry, no, Margaret. Patrick is next. Yes, Patrick.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, so I'm Patrick McLaren. I'm a geologist, retired, 76 years old, and a couple of years ago, I decided that with a rather adventurous life, I would give writing a memoir a try, and I self-published the first book, which is called Magic Travels: The Unlikely Adventures of a Geologist. And because I actually am a magician as well, but it was, and I found from experience that I'm not very good at marketing and don't really enjoy it, and self-publishing is difficult. I've written a second book continuing on from the first, and I'm in the middle of the third as I progress through my life. So what's happened? I want to read to you the opening of the second book, and it ends. The first book ended with me having been in the high Arctic when I was a junior assistant doing glaciological studies on the Barnes Ice Cap in Baffin Island, and I come back to Ottawa and have decided that there's no way I'm going back to Queen's University for a second year, and that I wanted to travel and bum around the world. And the second book is called A Year Around Earth. So this is the opening of that book, the second book. Patrick, get up here. It's your watch. Had I been asleep? I didn't think so. At that moment, I couldn't remember a time when I had ever experienced that blissful state. Archie was asleep, though. I could hear him snoring in the forward berth, and that was particularly irritating. How could he always sleep so well when I could not? It was pitch dark. Groggily, I felt my way up the narrow companionway, knocking my shoulders as the little vessel kept up its incessant, erratic rolls, the sort you get when the waves are too large and jumbled and the wind too light to hold a boat steady. Don was in his usual position, perched on the low side cockpit seat, one arm draped across the tiller, his body bent forward, his head over a bucket held between his knees. It was that sort of sea. The scene was fitfully illuminated by the flashlight Don struggled to direct at the compass, which heaved in and out of its beam as the boat pitched in the waves. Thank God you're here. He stared at me with a wild-eyed look of, well, I didn't want to admit it, but it was fear. Listen, he said, listen, I know you won't believe me, but I just heard a giant squid. You heard it? Are you sure? Come on, Don, that's not possible. I wanted to laugh reassuringly, but I couldn't. Instead, I sat across from him and looked anxiously into the blackness. Could this be true? I'm sure, Patrick. I'm telling you, I heard one in a Disney movie, so I know what they sound like. He went on with an unstoppable torrent of words. They exist, Patrick. I know they do. They can fling a tentacle over the side, grab your leg or arm, and you wouldn't stand a chance. You'd be pulled out of the boat before you even knew what was happening. Can you imagine what it would be like? I mean, what a way to go. And you wouldn't know. That's the most terrible thing. You wouldn't know. Can you imagine? You coming out to take over, and I wouldn't be here. You would never know what happened to me. Nobody would ever know. My parents, all my friends, no one, absolutely no one would know. And I'd be gone. He was right, of course. I had never thought about death by giant squid, but I'd had plenty of visions of the three of us being lost without a trace. And yes, the idea of no one ever knowing what had happened was more terrible than the disappearing itself, whatever the cause. Despite what I had said in my last letter to my parents before leaving Fiji, I knew our little vessel was not, as I had described, eminently seaworthy. Even in the cockpit, the noise of water slopping around inside the boat was louder than the waves slapping the hull from outside. I had also told them not to worry. If they didn't hear from me for a while, I also told them not to worry if they didn't hear from me for a while, that this might not happen until we reached Australia, 1,600 nautical miles away. And by now, even if we'd known precisely where we were, which we didn't, and even if we were making a constant 5 knots, which we weren't, it would take at least 2 weeks of continuous sailing to reach Brisbane, the nearest Australian landform. How could they be anything else but worried? If something did happen to me, they really would never know. The guilt I was feeling was much more dreadful than the fear. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Patrick. It's a nice dramatic story, and you not only write it well, but you read it well.
Well, I forgot to mention that took place in 1967.
Uh-huh. All right. Okay, well, thank you for sharing. Thank you very much. Our next reader is Heather. Heather, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Kahn, and I'm coming to you from Wassam, or Roberts Creek on the Sunshine Coast, which is part of the unceded territory of the Sechelt Nation. And I'm going to be reading you from my memoir, No Letter in Your Pocket, which was published by Guernica Editions in Ontario last year. And there's going to be a review of it in BC Book World in the next issue. So this book, almost half the book takes place in India, where I traveled solo there for in 1990-91 for 7 months. So from my train window in Rajasthan, I saw spindly white egrets swallowed into green, standing motionless at the edge of ponds as silent feathered forms. Sometimes they rode the backs of water buffalo. Bird tails of turquoise darted in front of the glass, then disappeared. Peacocks swaggered, their blue-green feathers aglow, hovering horizontal above the ground. Many birds in this country were bursting prisms of color, exotic gifts to the eye. Breathtaking emerald birds with orange wings and heads perched on telephone poles as my train clattered past. My reference book, Collins' Hand Guide to the Birds of the Indian Subcontinent, identified them as little green bee-eaters. Tired of writing generic phrases in my journal like, I saw another beautiful blue bird today, I had bought this small handbook to learn the names of these glimmering bodies of flight. The brilliance of landscape and wildlife in this western state stunned my eyes. It was mid-December 1990. I was heading back to Delhi and Mukesh. That was my Indian boyfriend at the time. Through the window, I watched an old man kiss a baby black and white goat on its nose. Rural boys washed their water buffalo like North Americans soaping down cars. Children rode the backs of these slow, snuffling beasts, lowering them into muddy water with kicks. After whacking them with sticks, they herded them back from a river or water hole. Often the only visible sign of the submerged buffalo was a snout and part of its back, like tiny brown stepping stones. At least I hope that's what they were. I filled my journal with the scenes before me. Pink, fuchsia, orange, and yellow saris flutter as women walk within lush fields, sparking the dusk sunlight with brilliant swatches. Hips swaying, they disappear down a wisp of path, balancing bundles of sticks on their heads. Wobbling, a man struggles on an ancient-looking bicycle, crooked tracks through bamboo thickets. Dabs of yellow rapeseed, a horrible name for such vibrancy, wave in the twilight wind across hilltops. From my headphones, Pachelbel's canon flows, putting me at ease. Desert dust clung to me as I stretched alone across my upper train bunk in a 4-berth compartment. Exhausted, I squeezed inside my mummy bag, unnecessary in this 42°C heat. Its sweaty, puffy layers gave me an odd sense of protection. My wallet and passport lay against my stomach, my hiking boots tucked against my head. Like a silent partner, my backpack curled next to me, a solo backpacker's precautions against theft. Gratefully cocooned in the semi-darkness, I allowed exhaustion to engulf me. With my back turned away from the other bunks, sounds held only a muffled presence, syncopated drum beats of wheels on track, and the faint hint of voices. With little awareness of the 4 or so others who occupied this stuffy, dusty room, I just wanted to sleep. Within drowsy minutes, someone grabbed my back. Did I imagine it? Leave me alone, I want to sleep. Moments later, I felt it again. Someone's hands had grabbed my lower back, then let go. How dare they? Who was it? After 6 months of harassment and attempted fondling from Indian men, I had to do something. Still wrapped within my sleeping bag, I gave one hard kick. My feet hit what felt like someone's stomach on the berth across from me. Whoever it was did not retaliate. I felt victorious. No more grabs. Too groggy to investigate further, I fell asleep. The next morning, I wanted to dismiss those nighttime jabs as imaginary, just as I had done with my dad's touches. Legs dangling inside my sleeping bag, I sat up on my berth and studied the other occupants. In the lower berth across from me, a 60-ish Indian woman patted down her waist-length black-gray hair. Clusters of thin bracelets jangled on her wrist. She straightened and smoothed out her sari. In the berth above her, a young man in his 20s, in tailored pants and a well-pressed shirt, smirked at me. Assuming that he was the guilty party, I glared at him. He turned away. I had to confront him. Stuffing my sleeping bag into its nylon sack, I surveyed my crumpled shirt and cotton pants. They would survive another day without a wash. Now everyone in the compartment sat facing each other. The old woman opened a round tiffin, a 3-tier stack of stainless steel food containers, and offered me a red-orange curried vegetable dish. I declined, marveling at the common practice in India of sharing food with fellow passengers. The young man avoided eye contact with me. From his middle-class appearance, I assumed that he spoke English. I looked straight at him. You know what you did. You had no right to touch me. Straightening his back and lifting his chin, he denied knowing or doing anything wrong. I am the son of, I don't care who you are. You should respect women, all women. The old Indian woman nodded her head in agreement. Bolstered by her silent support, I looked out the window. 10 minutes later, the young man's dark eyes found mine. Sorry, sorry, he said. Astounded, I smiled in gratitude. Ah, triumph. It would take me more than a decade to confront my father. That's it.
That's it. Oh, thank you very much. You write about an exotic place, and
Yeah.
you give us the details that put us right there very well. That's
thank you.
very good. Thank you very much. I have a message from Patricia that she, for some reason, she could not get into, she could not The Zoom, she could not get to be with us. She couldn't. She says she had difficulty getting into the Zoom meeting after many tries, but then she wants to read. Patricia, can you hear me? She's asking me if I can hear her. Patricia, can you hear me? No. Okay, well, I will reschedule Patricia for next time, which is March the 20th. And therefore, Jirina, who was on the waiting list, is next. Jirina, please. Jirina?
Sorry about that. Forgot to turn the mic on.
Okay, there you go.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
What a fantastic background. Where are you?
That is Malta.
Wow. All right. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Thank
Okay.
you. Well, I'll introduce myself. I'm Dorina Tobiasen, a writer of award-winning 20th century wartime fiction, as well as some short stories and poetry. And on occasion, while I'm working on a manuscript, a short story or recollection will beckon, and I have to interrupt my work to set it free. Dance Lessons is the name of the story I'm about to read, and it is one of those recollections. I had been invited to a wedding and needed to learn how to dance. Mark's dance school offered 3 introductory dance lessons for free. Surely, I thought, I can learn enough in those 3 days to save myself from embarrassment on the dance floor the following weekend. I signed up and was pleasantly surprised when Mark's youngest son, tall, dark, and handsome with deep brown bedroom eyes and at least 20 years my junior, introduced himself as my instructor. In those first few lessons, he taught me the basic steps of waltz, foxtrot, tango, and rumba. And as my free lessons came to an end and the wedding day loomed, I realized how naive I had been to think that I could learn to dance in 3 days. I couldn't have been more mistaken. I went to the wedding, pumped that I was going to dance, and considered myself fortunate when a kind elderly gentleman took pity on me and danced me around the hall. As he returned me to the table where I shared dinner with other guests, he apologized. "I haven't danced much since my wife died last year," he said. "I guess I've forgotten some of the steps." Oops. I knew he was referring to me and the fact that I didn't know the difference between a foxtrot and a waltz.
Mm-hmm.
Although my wedding experience was disappointing, my passion for dancing had been ignited. I needed to learn more. I needed to be better. The following week, I returned to the studio for more lessons, an action that changed my status from interested guest to new student. I was also introduced to a new instructor, Mark's older son, also tall, dark, and handsome, with a Latin flair. He too was considerably younger than me. The more dances I learned, the more I craved. Dancing became my passion, my obsession. I took advantage of every class and every practice party the studio had to offer. I was in heaven. Over the next many months, Mark's elder son taught me not only dance moves, but style, poise, posture, rhythm, how to slide, how to glide, how to pose, how to use my hips, my knees, hands, arms, all to full advantage, and most important of all, how to maintain my frame. I was constantly amazed to find myself, pardon me, exhausted and drenched at the end of a 45-minute lesson. I had no idea when I began that dancing was a competitive sport and a weight loss program. Then one day, my young instructor announced that he was leaving the studio to pursue other interests. The news was for me devastating. I wondered what would happen next. I knew that the other instructors had full calendars and were taking no new students. Soon I found myself sitting in Mark's office discussing my dance history, my goals, and what he would like to teach me. Wait, him teach me? I was both stunned and overjoyed. I knew Mark as the owner of the studio. He oversaw its business and, of course, danced at practice parties. What I didn't know until that moment was that he had a history as a dance instructor. As owner of the business, he was alert, always ensuring the satisfaction, if not happiness, of his students. I had presumed his dancing at the practice parties was an extension of his obligations to his clients. I started working my life as a welder, Mark said, sitting behind his desk, stapling his fingers under his chin. One day, when faced with the thought of going to a wedding where I'd be expected to dance with women, I decided to take dance lessons. After a few lessons, I realized that I simply could not learn to dance overnight. I signed up for more lessons, time passed, and now I own this studio. I gawked at him, awed that his story mirrored my own. Mark was not my idea of a leading man, but he was indeed a leading man. He was average height, short graying hair, straight back. He walked from his hips, but always with a smoothness that typified his career as a ballroom dancer. When he danced, he was powerful, commanding, precise, and funny. During practice parties, his eyes danced too, full of mischief. The first time I stepped into Mark's upheld arms, I was very nervous. I knew how well he danced, and I hoped I wouldn't disappoint him. My expectations made me quiver, and I looked into his eyes with apprehension. He fastened his right hand in the center of my back and the left hand comfortably around my right hand, raised an eyebrow, cocked his head, and bent his knees, sliding his left foot toward me. I had no choice. I bent my knees and slid my right foot back. His power moved us onward. Strength, fluidity, smoothness, and flexibility. We glided around the room over the beautiful oak floors. Then, just as smoothly as the dance had begun, it elegantly ended with him slowly dipping me backward. I wanted it to go on. I wanted to dance with him all night, but I had a dance lesson to complete. That was just the warm-up. As time passed, I did learn to dance, not as a professional, but because of Mark's remarkable instruction and discipline, reasonably well. After a few years, I even entered a competition in New Orleans with him as my partner, and to my delight, I even won some gold and silver medals. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. When was the last time you danced?
Oh, 2013. I had to give it up for arthritic knees.
But it's been an important experience, a defining experience in your life.
Absolutely, yes.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you very much, Serena. Thank you for doing it on a short notice. Thank you
No
very much.
worries. Thank you for the
right.
opportunity.
Well, we are done. Fantastic. What a lively group. What an array of experiences, locations, writing styles, impressions, tones. Everybody is different. Everybody's story is different. Do you have any comments about what you have heard?
Well, I'd just like to congratulate all the readers. That was, as you said, Elizabeth, that was just a wonderful hour. I really enjoyed it.
All right.
Yes, and I just unmuted myself to say we have a lot of strong writers out there.
And they have lived good lives and have stories to tell. Yes, all right. Well, we have another session devoted to autobiography and memoir, and it's on Wednesday, March the 20th. And we have a full slate of readers. So it's been a wonderful experience. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you for all those who attended. Thank you all those who read. And please come and support the writers next time. And thank you very much, and good night, everybody.
You.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Night.
Bye.
Good night.
Yes.
Great.